The Entrepreneur's Library, episode 158.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Library, the only book-centric podcast that reviews all the top-selling business books and shares authors' perspective firsthand. This is your resource to finding the next great book that will enable you to grow personally and professionally. Welcome your host, Wade Danielson.
Welcome back to the EL. Today we have Peter Bregman, author of 4 Seconds. And Peter actually has a special offer for you guys if you're wanting to pre-order his book. And so you have an opportunity to listen to him talk about it here in just a minute. But if you want to pre-order his book, there's a free webinar that he's putting in to go over additional information based on the content that's in that book. So if that's something that you're interested in, we'll put the links in the show notes at the elpodcast.com. But without further ado, let's get Peter on. Welcome, Peter, and thank you for joining us on the Entrepreneur's Library.
Thanks so much for having me.
Before we take a deep dive into your book, we take just a moment to introduce yourself. Tell us just a little bit about you personally.
Sure. I am the CEO of Bregman Partners. It's a company that strengthens leadership in people and in organizations. We do leadership programs, we do coaching, and I work as an advisor to CEOs, and I do a lot of writing. So I have a blog at HBR, Harvard Business Review, and I have my own website where I do a lot of writing and really thinking about human behavior and the things that we do that get in our own way, the things that we do that either help us or prevent us from being successful.
So Peter, thank you for sharing that. And now let's jump right into your book, 4 Seconds. All the time you need to stop counterproductive habits and set the results and get the results you want, which was just made, well, actually it's about to be made available February 24, 2015. And Peter, we're going to move quickly. But our top goal here is to help the future or the listener / future reader get all their questions answered before they dive into your book. And the first one is, what was the inspiration behind writing 4 Seconds?
You know, the inspiration really was my own consistent failure. That I find that there are habits that I am in, and when I look around me, I'm not alone, that we do intuitively, things that I would respond. Someone has a point of view I disagree with, I argue. I have my own failure and I spin out. And things that I do routinely in relationships with other people, in my own mindset, at work, that are habitual and instinctive and knee-jerk, and at the same time are counterproductive. They're things that, we don't even really think about before we do. And if we thought for a second, we probably wouldn't do it, but we're moving really, really fast. And I found myself consistently caught up in those kinds of behaviors that ultimately were not working for me. And it's even hard to tell that they're not working for me because I'm moving so fast that I don't always assess the outcomes, even afterwards. I just might notice, wow, I didn't get that deal. Or as an entrepreneur myself, I'm constantly moving to working with clients and thinking of new ideas and creating new products. And I'm just moving fast. And it was hard for me to notice that the mistakes that I was making. And the inspiration was to uncover my own blind spots. And when I was doing that, when I saw the impact that it had on my work, on my business, on my relationships, I kind of wanted to write more about it and help expose it for other people.
So Peter, we talked beforehand about how many books the entrepreneur is inundated with on a monthly basis. So will you take the next little bit and tell us some differentiators of your book, or tell us what makes your book different from others regarding the same or similar topic?
Yeah, one of the things actually that make it different, I think, is the writing style. So, for anyone who's read any of my previous books and the way that I write, every chapter is about 3 pages. They're all story based. They are what I hear. I mean, I don't want to. I don't want to lose humility here. What I hear from other people is that it's a fun and an interesting read. So I'm not getting deep into concepts without really making them applicable, really making them something that, because of the way it's written, can easily impact your life. Like you could, read something in a few pages and there's a specific, clear outcome of something that you can start to play with that doesn't require you to write a list and take a lot of time and train or develop yourself. It's an idea. There's an idea in each chapter, and each of those ideas are immediately implementable, and they're written in a way that makes it clear that you can apply it to your life. So that's one way. I think another way is that a lot of times you get people who are really great writers, or you get people who are really kind of understand business really well, and they aren't necessarily, and then you get people separately who understand people and who understand behavior. And I think what this book does is it brings it together. We've got, there's a research-based approach to a bunch of it in terms of what works and what doesn't work. And there's, I write, and the book approaches the challenge, right, of shifting our behavior in a way that's specifically geared to shift behavior, and in a way that takes into consideration, like, how does it work? You're entrepreneur, if you're listening to this, what is it that we need to do when we're starting business, running businesses, dealing with the problems that we face in businesses, and how do we, in a very, very practical way, do that with a clear understanding of human behavior and human nature, and in a way that actually inspires us to do something about it to make ourselves better. Because ultimately, as an entrepreneur, the key issue that will always limit our business or expand it to an opportunity is us. Like for me, running my business, I am the key enabler or obstacle. And so the book is written in a style and in a way and with a goal that would help people who if they change their behavior in small, very doable ways, that it impacts a much larger swath of their lives, both in terms of their relationship and in terms of their businesses.
So you were just talking about the way it was written, and this next question goes along with that. How do you suggest the reader engage with your book? Can they jump in and jump out as they need information, or was it really designed to be read from front to back?
They can absolutely jump in and jump out, and it was designed very intentionally with an order. So there's 3 parts to the book. Part 1 is titled "Change Your Mental Defaults." Right? It's about how we think, what goes on in our minds that nobody can see, but what goes on in our mind, as every entrepreneur knows, is as important. That's the birthplace of everything that ends up happening in the world. And so we really need to be very aware of what our mindset is and how our mindset is either helping or getting in the way, and how we speak to ourselves even. The second part is strengthen your relationships, which is to really look, and I could talk in a little bit more detail about each of these parts, but that's really about how we connect with other people or how we disconnect from other people, and how that, what are some key things that we tend to do that we think help us to be in deeper relationship with people, but actually separate us from them. And the third part is optimize your work habits. It's really looking at this within the context of an organization or a business, and to say what are the ways that we hurt ourselves and our businesses when we're actually trying to help it, and what are replacement habits? What are things that we can do instead that will make us more successful? So yes, you can enter any one of these chapters. Every single one of these chapters stand alone, and there's a flow to the idea of work on yourself and your mind and your mindset, then bring it to other people, and then bring it to larger groups and organizations as a whole. So there's a flow to the book, but if you're the kind of person that likes to dive in and just read a chapter at a time, there's every chapter in effect stands on its own.
Great. So now we know the purpose and the background of the book. Let's take a deep dive into the content itself. So we take the next 5 to 8 minutes and really give the reader, the listener, future reader, a great idea of what they're going to get out of your book.
Sure. So as I said before, it's broken up into 3 parts, right? In 3 parts: change your mental defaults, strengthen your relationships, and optimize your work habits. The first part really talks about ourselves and our habits and the habits that we get into, and it's based on a general premise that here's the science behind it, right? The science behind it is there are events that happen in our lives. Someone yells at me. Let's just take that as an example. Someone yells at me. When they yell at me, I have a stimulus in my brain. That stimulus goes to my amygdala. There's a part of my brain, it's the limbic portion of the brain. It's the early reptilian brain. It's the fight, flight, or freeze part of the brain. And something happens, and the stimulus goes straight to my amygdala. And 9 times out of 10, we respond out of the place that the stimulus first hits, right? So someone yells at me, I turn around, I do whatever I normally do. I yell, I run away, I just stand there. Whatever I'm going to do, that's how I respond. And this is not just about knee-jerk reactions to violent events. There's other situations. So, for example, I'm going through my day, and I'm sitting there looking at my email, and I just through email by email by email, and I don't really pause, and I'm just responding or reacting out of habit. And then at the end of the day, I look back and I say, wow, I was busy all day, but I didn't really accomplish the things that were most important to me. And we can look at so many situations where we're reacting out of, and that's, by the way, an amygdala response as well. It's a much more mellow. We're not being attacked by a saber-toothed tiger or an angry person, but we're in the, we're actually being attacked by the nonstop flow of emails coming in, and we're wanting to address them and deal with them. There's another, and this is all related to the first part of the book. There's a chapter in there, why I returned my iPad, right? The idea that I bought this iPad and everybody loves it. It was the coolest thing in the world. But when I looked back, I realized I was filling all of my time doing stuff that was almost irresistible in the moment, but wasn't actually contributing to the life that I wanted to live. So, I want to get to sleep early. I want to read more books. And what I found was I would start by reading a book on my iPad, and then an email would come in, and I would switch over and start reading the email, and that would send me to a link on the web, and then the web would send me to an advertisement, and suddenly it's still an hour later. I'm in bed. I haven't read. I haven't gone to sleep. And I've been wandering the internet for the past hour, which was not at all what I wanted to do. And so these are responses that we don't pause to think about. Now, there's another part of the brain. There's lots of parts of the brain, obviously, but there's another part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. And that's the part of the brain that we think from. And from that part of the brain, we can make smarter choices. But we have to pause. And it turns out that you only need a couple of seconds. So I was generous in the book. I gave people 4 seconds. But you only need a couple of seconds to pause long enough for the stimulus to go from your amygdala, which is the place from which you habitually react, to your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that actually thinks. And so I can sit in bed with my iPad and pause for just a couple of seconds and take a deep breath. 4 seconds is the amount of time it takes for a deep breath. And by the way, the deep breath itself calms the system and slows down the processing. So you take a deep breath, and I can ask myself, is this really what I want to be doing right now? Like, what do I want? I'm in bed. It's 9:30. I've gotten in bed really early. Usually I'm at dinner at 9:30. Now I'm in bed at 9:30. Do I want to start with an iPad? Or do I want to read a little bit and then just go to sleep? And asking that question allows me to be more intentional about my response. So when someone yells at me, I take a deep breath. And rather than yelling back, which is what I might do, or running away, I could pause and I could say, what's the outcome I want here? What am I going for? Who is this person? Are they a client? Are they like an angry driver? Who is this person, and what is the outcome that I want? And then I can make a deliberate, intentional, strategic choice about what to do next. And it doesn't take long to make those choices. But it just allows us to subvert the reaction that we would normally have. So some of the things that I talk about in this first part are goal setting. I talk about why goal setting is this gut reaction. Everybody talks about how great it is to do goals. You probably have heard about, the study where a whole bunch of, you hear it in different ways. It could be Harvard, it could be Yale graduates. A small percentage of the class, just a few people in the class, set really clear goals, and 20 years later, they were worth more than everybody else in the entire class combined who didn't set goals. Well, that turns out that story is a complete myth. It never happened. The research study was never done. And in fact, there's a lot of research that suggests that setting goals, which is particularly interesting to entrepreneurs because we have such a tendency to set goals, the setting goals is actually in many situations counterproductive and makes it harder for us to get what's actually really most important to us. So I have a chapter about rethinking goal setting. I have a chapter about motivation and follow through, how the general, when we're not doing something, we think our problem is motivation. We try to motivate ourselves. We try to rah-rah. We try to get, at the core of why we want to do this and really light the fire. Actually, oftentimes the fire is the least of our problems. That's not the issue. For most of us as entrepreneurs, we have no problem with fire. Actually, motivation is very rarely our problem. Our problem as entrepreneurs is follow through and structuring follow through in the right kind of way. So there's a chapter in there about that. There's a chapter about the urge to be perfect, which for an entrepreneur is completely destructive. We cannot be successful as entrepreneurs if we're striving for perfection. That's just not how you build a company. It's not how you build sort of new ideas. You can only build new ideas by making mistake after mistake after mistake. There's chapters about slowing down, of stopping, taking breaths, of how we speak to each other. There are chapters about, this is really important. There's a chapter called Carlos's Double Whammy, Reclaim Your Sweet Spot. This is a really important part of the book, which talks about the ways in which we bring ourselves out of what we are best at because we're playing so many different roles and the business needs us to play so many different roles. This is a classic entrepreneurial trap, right? Where we end up doing 20 things when really we should be doing 2 and finding other people to do the others. But we leave our sweet spot and the thing that really got us started, we become disconnected with it, and we become disconnected with our passion around the business. We become incapable of following through on the things because they're not really our sweet spot. So that's very much the first part of the book has a lot to do with those ideas, how to be prepared when you don't know what's going to happen, etc. The second part, strengthening your relationships, is all about the knee-jerk reactions that we have in relationship to other people. When someone fails, we try to make them feel better, or whatever habit you have, they're often sort of ineffective habits in that way. So one of the things that we do as entrepreneurs sometimes is that we sometimes will deprioritize friendships because we really want to draw that line between work and friendship, and there's a lot of research that points to the fact that that's a mistake, that's not a great thing to do. We're passionate people as entrepreneurs, so especially in relationships, someone does something wrong, it's really easy to write them off, right? Turns out that that's often a really big mistake. We see things for what they are, and that there's a lot of times. I have a chapter called "It's Not About the Shampoo," which is very much about listening for the unspoken. What are people not saying, and what do we learn from what they're not saying? There's a chapter about the best gift that you can give everyone, which turns out not to be money at all, and that if you really want to inspire someone, it's really about appreciation in a certain way, not even about what they do, but about themselves, that ends up really creating the kind of loyalty that people are looking for, that we need, again, as entrepreneurs. There's a big piece that, again, we really need as entrepreneurs called no, establish boundaries with others, is the importance and the necessity of creating the kinds of boundaries that as entrepreneurs we often don't have, and it's why we end up burnt out in a lot of ways, or why we end up burning out the people around us. And then there's this third part around optimizing work habits. And that's really so much about leadership, the leadership that we have to show, even if you're an independent entrepreneur with no one reporting to you, the kind of leadership that you need to show as a leader organizationally, because you're going to be working cross-functionally with other organizations. You really need to be able to step into your leadership. So what does that mean? There's a complaining with the complainers is a chapter about neutralizing negativity. There's a big chapter about letting people fail. That's very, very hard for us. As entrepreneurs, we're usually really great at something, right? And it usually has to do with the core of our business, and it's usually very, very hard to let other people who may not be as great as us at it to do it and fail. And yet the only way we can grow our organizations is through that failure, is creating opportunities actually for people to fail or almost fail. That's a chapter called The Training Wheels Had to Come Off. There's a chapter about sharing the glory called Who Deserves the Credit for a Great Movie, where I sort of unpack the Oscar winners. There's a chapter, The Chef Who Didn't Get It, Take Responsibility for Your Colleagues' Work, about the importance of breaking out of silos and why we fall into the silos and how to break out of it. The importance of being helpful instead of nice, especially for the people who work for us. And helpful, it's I can almost say for entrepreneurs, how to be helpful and not nice, but also not mean. How do you actually support people's performance, which is so important to us if we're going to grow our organizations. There's a chapter called Crying About a Gift, Create a Safe Space for Yourself and Others, about how to create that kind of space where people can experiment and fail and actually show emotion, which is so much a part of life, obviously. There's a chapter called The Pea Haters Who Ate Peas Like Pea Lovers, which is all about how to get other people to change, right? There's a lot of, my very first book that I ever put out called Point B, A Short Guide to Leading a Big Change, was very much about change. And there's pieces of that book in this one around how to, again, as entrepreneurs, we're in the game of changing people, either people who are working for us, try to get the kind of output that we want, and also clients or people who we want to have take our, buy our product, work with us, buy our services. So that's very much about that. And then finally, there's the last chapter before the conclusion, how Jory lost 80 pounds. And it's very much about our tendency, again, as entrepreneurs, our tendency is to use willpower and discipline and push through things. That's not a very effective way of gaining performance. And it's much more about, can you restructure your environment in a way that supports the kinds of behaviors you want to support? So that just gives you, I might have even taken more than my 5 to 8 minutes, but that gives you a sense of the flow of the book and some of the ideas, and maybe from the chapter titles, you get a little bit of a feel for the story-based quality of the book.
So, Peter, thank you for taking us through that. And now I'm going to ask you to break it down even a step further in asking that if the reader can only take away one concept, principle, or action item out of everything you just discussed with us, out of your entire book, what would you want that to be?
That's easy. Slow down. Just slow down. Take a deep breath. Even if you're just slowing down for 4 seconds, take a deep breath. And before you act in almost any situation, take a deep breath and ask yourself the question, what is the outcome I want in this situation? I think if we all paused for 4 seconds and asked, what is the outcome I want, and we were curious about that. We were curious about what is the outcome I'm going for. That would open up a huge new space for us to take different actions that will more likely bring us to the outcomes that we're going for.
Excellent. So there's some quote-worthy things that you just said in that, but that's our next question as well. Do you have a favorite quote from your book, and will you take a second to explain what it means?
Sure. I'm going to cheat. I have a couple of favorite quotes. I think I'm going to throw them both out. One is, what if we chose not to miss an opportunity to be inspired? If we gossiped about things people did that energized us without fixating on the things that disappointed us. If we looked for sparks that ignited our enthusiasm and induced our goodwill. And if we allowed those sparks to light our fires of passion. And I think we have very high expectations as entrepreneurs. And I think we have a tendency as entrepreneurs to look at the things that aren't working and the negativity. It's why we work really hard to make things good. And I think we miss opportunities to be inspired. And I think it's really interesting and fun to look at people and say, what is it that they're doing that I think is awesome? And to allow that to inspire us and others, I think makes a huge difference in our capacity to make an impact in the world and on the people around us who are helping us to make our vision come true. And I want to put that together with this other quote, which is, learning anything isn't about doing it right. It's about doing it wrong and then adjusting. Learning isn't about being in balance. It's about recovering balance. And I like that because that is the reality that we live with as entrepreneurs. Everything is trial and error. We are running before, we put products out before we've even fully thought them through, which I think is a smart thing to do. Because when things work or when they don't work, that gives us data, it's information. We're scientists doing experiments. And if we can stay grounded in the face of all of those failures, then we can fail our way to success. And so I think both of those quotes are kind of typical of some of what you read in the book, and I think important.
Excellent, Peter. And we're going to put both of those. There's a lot of people that are mobile right now, running, driving, whatnot, and we'll probably like to reflect on those again later. So we'll put them in the show notes at the elpodcast.com so they can go back and reflect on those. And my last question for you, Peter, it's got to be a book question because it's a book-centric podcast. So if there's only one book you could recommend based on the way that it's impacted your life, created a paradigm or a lifestyle shift, what book would you recommend?
That's a really hard question. I really like books. I'm going to give you 2 books that are very different from each other, actually. one book that I think had a really big impact on my life and that I really liked. Of course, you're talking about books that are not my books, right?
Yeah.
Okay. One of the books that I really have enjoyed is a book by a guy named Brian Wansink, and it's called Mindless Eating. And it's very much about these little things that we do in our lives that have a huge impact. So, for example, you wouldn't think that the size of the spoon you use to eat will make a difference as to whether you eat more or less. But the reality is, the size of the spoon you use to eat probably makes the difference of 5 pounds a year, or how far the candy bowl is from your desk, or these ways in which our environments and fast food companies and the food industry really leverages this really well. They started with experiments in movie theaters around popcorn. What a difference your environment and the choices you make and packaging and makes on the way we act and respond. And we think we eat when we're hungry, or we stop, or even we eat when we're emotionally stressed or something. But we also eat based on availability, and we eat, and it's true for every aspect of our lives. It's true for leadership. It's true for our time. If my iPad is near my bed, right? The iPad that I returned, if I put that near my bed, I'm much more likely to stay up really late watching something than if I don't. And it's about structuring our environment to make it more likely that we do the things we want to do. So even though it's about eating, I really love that book. And then the other book I'll just throw out there, which was translated and edited by Coleman Barks, is The Essential Rumi. And it's a book of Rumi poetry. He was a mystic poet, and that's just the kind of book I could keep reading over and over again, because like any book of poetry, you always learn something, and I love Rumi's spirituality, and I think Coleman Barks is a great translator.
Thank you for both of those. I don't think we've ever gotten a recommendation for either one. That first one, man, I'm a victim of that big time, and my wife doesn't put out bad snacks, but she always keeps grapes out. And every time I walk by, I think I eat half a pound of grapes a day.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it is.
Just because of that.
And Brian's done these amazing experiments. So one thing he did was he piped in, he had people eating soup at a table. And for some people, their soup, he had pipes underneath the table where their soup bowl never got less than half full. So no matter how much soup you ate, there would always be half a bowl of soup left. And people ate way more soup, obviously, than the people who just emptied their bowl. And it's these simple things. He did experiments with people eating barbecue chicken wings, and the difference between the number of chicken wings you eat if you leave the bones on the table versus if the waitress or waiter removes the bones from the table, because you're getting this visual of how much you've already eaten. If you remove the visual of how much you've already eaten, that impacts how much you continue to eat. So, you read that, and it's about food. It's not about business, but it's not hard to make the link.
Yeah.
And I make the link around, and I have some of this research in 4 seconds, because I think it's so related to how people act and how we behave, and we behave in that same way at work. And it's really about creating structures that support our success.
Yeah, that's powerful. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm gonna have to check that one out. But Peter, before we depart, can you recommend the best way for our listeners to not only get more information on you, but also get more information on your book, 4 Seconds?
Sure. So my website is www.peterbregman. Easy to remember if you remember my name. PeterBregman. Peter Bregman. www.peterbregman.com.
Okay.
And if you go there, you can find, we have all the articles I write for Harvard Business. We've got videos. We've got links to 4 Seconds. There's a quiz on the website. It's a good quiz to know about. And it's a quiz asking, are your habits counterproductive? So if you go on the website, and you can look on the right side, and you could take that quiz, are your habits counterproductive? And you begin to get a sense as to, are you doing these things that tend to work, or are you doing these things that get in the way? Which is always really fun. So you can get all of that on the website. If you go to the homepage of my website at peterbregman.com, the book itself is you could just click on the book, and you can see more information about the book and ways to order your copy.
Perfect. Well, Peter, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your book with us.
My pleasure. It was a lot of fun to talk about it. Thank you for creating the opportunity.
Thank you so much for listening in today. If you'd like more information on Peter or his book, 4 Seconds, check out the show notes at the elpodcast.com. And at that same spot, the elpodcast.com, you can actually become a VIP and have the opportunity to win this book.
Looking for your next book idea? Head over to the elpodcast.com, where Wade shares his amazing resource, the top 10 business books recommended by over 500 entrepreneurs, with you for free. That's the elpodcast.com. Till the next time, keep it on the EL.